Now let's look at international news, where the International Criminal Court has condemned the move by US President Donald Trump to place it under US sanctions. Yesterday, Trump issued an executive order accusing the ICC of illegitimate actions against the US and its ally, Israel. Trump authorized economic as well as travel sanctions on those involved in ICC investigations of US citizens or allies like Israel. Now, this move mirrors similar actions from his first term. And last year, the ICC issued arrest warrants for Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, as well as his former Defense Minister Yoav Gallant. And this angered the US. The ICC, with 125 member states, prosecutes individuals for war crimes, crimes against humanity, genocide and aggression. The US, China, Russia and Israel are not members. To further unpack this, let's now welcome Dr. Thelela Ngcetane-Vika, who's an international law, security studies and global governance expert from the Wits University School of Governance. Doctor, great having you with us. Thank you so much for your time. So another daring move on the part of the US to show its unwavering support to its biggest allies, which is Israel, but at what cost to its geopolitical influence as well as positioning?
Yes, good afternoon to your viewers too. We are indeed on a very uncharted territory in the global order, because those very sanctions on the ICC are not only about ICC, if you look at them closely, but they're about the destabilization of the international order, the architecture of the United Nations being founded post-World War II. And it's always interesting the fact that the United States is not even a member of the ICC, but the power it exerts across, it would seem states, across bodies of a global nature is really, really worrying and troubling, but not surprising nonetheless.
Mm-hmm. And Doctor, I mean, the US is not a member, but for Trump to inadvertently concede to the fact that firstly, Gaza is rubble and not fit for human occupation, basically admitting to the fact that Israel has in fact wiped out that particular city, a crime they are in fact being persecuted for by the courts, including the ICC. So how should then the international community as well as lawmakers respond to this almost dismissal of the crimes that took place in Gaza committed by Israel?
Well, this moment is calling for all the member states that ratified the ICC to really stand up. Mm-hmm. Of course, you've got exceptions of Hungary, who are already threatening, Trump's allies, who are already threatening to exit ICC. But I think that the best way to go for those who are still believing in justice, the international order architecture, especially the important role that ICC is specifically situated to play in genocidal acts like we saw in Gaza, and also just taking in those like Netanyahu and others who are alleged to have committed crimes of genocide and war crimes to appear before a body, an international body. Otherwise, if that body collapses, then the victims of genocide, human rights violations across the world would suffer the most.
Mm-hmm. And quite interesting, Doctor, that we were at actually somewhat of a forefront of this ICC spat with South Africa when, of course, we failed to arrest a sitting head of state at a particular time when we had those ICC sanctions. But, I mean, looking at these sanctions then in detail, Doctor, I mean, he ordered asset freezes, travel bans against the members as well as families of the ICC staff. Can he do this, albeit not being a member? And then what challenges do these sanctions actively present for the ICC in meeting out its duties?
Well, it creates a really existential threat to the ICC, because then you've got the chief prosecutor in the name, person of Quran, that you make them to be on shaky grounds, because remember how international law is structured. It depends on the member states, the commitment of the member states on its own. It becomes a body that's very, very difficult to enforce laws. So when you've got member states who are not on solid ground, you have a problem. But to answer the first question, why would a United States, which is not a member of the ICC, exert that much power? Well, the answer is very simple. It's the power the United States have. And it does, yes, it's very interesting. And if you see the response even within the EU, I mean, countries like Germany, of course, Netherlands, where the ICC is being hosted amongst others, they're committed to it. But there are others like Hungary who are feeling that, well, we agree with President Trump. But it tells you that the architecture of the international law is problematic, because it depends on these political dynamics, who's in, who's not in. But also it tells you of the hypocrisy sometimes within the United States as the so-called leading democratic state in the world. But on matters of justice, when it affects themselves and their friends, they're always found wanting, aren't they?
Absolutely. I mean, nobody's criticizing Netanyahu or even Trump, or that he visited Trump at his Oval Office. Meanwhile, we were criticized highly, of course, for even thinking about hosting President Putin when he still had that order. Now, on a broader context, Doctor, and in closing, I mean, the recent sweeping moves by the U.S. president has generally drawn sharp criticism against him, as much as we appreciate a decisive leader who will not shy away from fulfilling his campaign policies as well as promises. This is also dangerous in that the rule of law, as you've alluded, still needs to be respected. Or really, we're just promoting lawlessness as well as selective justice. What can world powers do against Trump?
It's going to be a very turbulent 4 years. Let me just put it very categorically and very clear. And we're going to be here for quite some time. It's going to be bumpy for some time. Remember, President Trump is really, a very hyperbolic, a populist kind of a leader. So he thrives on these things, because you can even ask fundamental questions within the United States that executive orders have got limited powers to a particular point. Yes. So perhaps the Congress would need to ratify some of these, or agree or don't agree. But what does it tell us? It tells us maybe the global community is entering into a very uncharted space where the right wing seem to be taking some rise. And where does that leave the rest of the world if you're not right sort of leaning? Or are we learning a new phenomenon that the world is looking for this kind of leadership from Trump, the one that doesn't seem to care about, a governance architecture of the world that are there? I mean, the fact that he joined the World Economic Forum from far away was also an interesting thing. I know I digress, but it tells us how these 4 years are going to be. But we must also remember, as I conclude, that presidents come and go. And there will be a time that President Trump presidents will come to an end. This is why countries who are believing in democracy, in justice, must defend bodies like the ICC. 120-something members that are ratified, I'm sure. But it's not easy like that, because there are global dynamics, trade relations, military relations, and the list is endless. Absolutely. And people want to be friends with the President of the United States.